We are moving on with Michelle, our last one for the day. Michelle has two of her faculty mentors here, Cynthia Wagner and Cindy Gardner. So we just want to acknowledge that they're here. We're happy to support Michelle. And yeah, I mean,
an honors college advisor.
and an honors college student as well. I keep forgetting that. And so, just for those who are new, it's a 10 to 12 minute presentation. She'll have a few cue cards over here from Samira regarding the time. And after that is open to questions and answers, which we'd love to hear student questions first before we break them over. So, Michelle, we'll move whenever you're ready. We'll start the talk.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Sue, and I'm a biology and interdisciplinary studies major with a concentration in human aesthetics. Today, I will be presenting my capstone research on the importance of physical beauty to the modern American woman. First, I'd like to start with my acknowledgments. I'd like to thank my INDS advisor, Stephen McAlpin, for helping me since 2012. My INDS faculty mentors, Cindy Gardner from Visual Arts, Dr. Cynthia Wagner from Biology, and Dr. Elizabeth Picciuto from Philosophy. I'd also like to thank my INDS 480 instructor, Dr. Eric Montgomery, my INDS faculty and staff who've been with me throughout this whole process, Dr. Stephen Freeland, Eric Brown, Carrie Souter, Asif Majid, and Samira Hassan. I'd also like to thank the non-INDS faculty and staff that helped me with the writing and art that went into my comic, which includes Dr. Tamara Mendelson from Biology, Dr. Kate Drabinski from Gender and Women's Studies, Dr. Mike Nance from Philosophy, Deborah Rudisil from English, and Joanne Gadsby and Semhar Yohannes from the library. Finally, I'd like to thank my funding source, Dr. Fiza Majid, who provided me with the Zainab Damji Scholarship that I will be using for the printing and publication of my comic. So first, I'd like to introduce someone that may be familiar to all of you. This was me. And as you can see, I look kind of different from the way I do today. And so my investment in this topic is personal. I, frankly, had a hard time growing up as a chubby Asian girl in America. I had issues making friends, and this led to quite a lot of social introversion for the most part. I vividly remember a lot of the insults that were directed towards my physical appearance, even after I shed the baby fat that you see here. However, there was an upside to all of this. Through my social introversion, I looked inward, and I developed my skills in art and writing. Here you can see me at the National Gallery of Art posing in a somewhat similar fashion to that sculpture behind me. And I usually ask my mom to bring me to museums so that I could garner inspiration for my artistic and creative works. Here is one of my first polished comics that I developed in 2006. It was autobiographical, and I considered this to be one of my first successful comics. And so I just provided that for some actual comic relief. Throughout middle school, I started developing a personal style in both my physical appearance and in my artwork. And from that, I actually managed to make some friends. I made some good impressions. And I started creating comics about my friendships. And that, in turn, not only led to the attention of my friends who wanted to read them, but also my peers and my teachers who were interested in looking at my work. From then on, comics were my thing. And so I have some examples of comics from late elementary and middle school. Here, this is a cartoon, really, and it incorporates a bunch of simplified versions of my dog that I was practically obsessed with when I was little. Here's a comic that I made in 2007 regarding me and my relationships with my three best friends at the time. In high school, I diversified my use of comics a lot, and I started using them for school projects and a variety of other things. For example, this is from my AP Chem course where I submitted this comic in order to teach brief lessons about organic chemistry. This one is an example of a comic that I did about a modern retelling of Hamlet for my AP Lit class. And finally, although this was kind of a risky move, I used a comic in order to make a supplemental essay for my Columbia University admissions. And so I think there's a lot of poetic justice in my project overall. Today, I want to talk from the perspective of a woman who's a lot more confident in my physical appearance and in my skill set. And so I want to reflect on the importance of beauty to the modern American woman through a medium that I'm really comfortable with, comics. So here are my objective and research goals. First, I wanted to create an effective and engaging comic book. I used two particular sources in order to inform my making of a comic for this project. One being Unflattening by Nick Sousanis, and the other one being Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art by Scott McClellan. My second objective was to explore the following research question. What is the importance of physical beauty to the modern American woman? And I constrained my research a bit. First, I only focused on physical beauty, beauty that specifically pertains to the human physical form. Second, I defined the modern American woman as any woman in the general age range of about 18 to 29. The overarching category for all women in my study was cisgender. These are women that identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Additionally, these subcategories were also studied: heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual women, as well as the major demographics of this nation, which are white women, black women, Hispanic women, and Asian women. I drew early inspiration from the following comics. One being Inuyasha by Rumiko Takahashi, one of my favorites growing up. The Uncanny X-Men by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And Akira by Katsuhiro Otomo. And so I thought it was pretty intuitive that reading these comics, I would get the sense of the storyline, the action, in a very intuitive sense. But I couldn't describe in an intellectual way how exactly these comics worked. And this is where I go back to the comics that I used to specifically help me understand comics. One being Unflattening, and the other being Understanding Comics, which I actually have today to pass around. There are two bookmarks here. And one bookmark page points to a thoroughly categorized pictorial graph of character designs and how they work in the conjunction between pictures, pictures, text, and reality. Additionally, another page talks about an INDS bridging strategy, actually, reasoning through analogies, in which McLeod talks about how art and words can combine in order to enhance meaning in a natural way. So let me talk a little bit about my actual comic. Here's the premise. I, the researcher, fall asleep out of sheer exhaustion. I've just been working so hard on my research, I just pass out. And in a dream, I encounter a well-versed alter ego of myself that happens to know everything that I need to know for this project. So, how convenient. The alter ego and I converse with each other, and she guides me through various disciplinary perspectives that ultimately answer my research question. So here you see an example of a conversation between me and my alter ego. As you can see, they're fashioned a little differently. There were existing works on physical beauty that I worked off of in order to inform my research. One being Survival of the Prettiest by Nancy Etkoff, a psychologist at Massachusetts General Hospital, and the other being Face Value, The Politics of Beauty, written by Robin Lakoff and Raquel Scher, linguists. And so they both provided me with important pre-21st century perspectives on physical beauty and its importance to the modern American woman. However, they did not really incorporate images, something that I personally thought was very important in the understanding of this topic. So I'm going to go over my research methodology. I borrowed strategies from INDS, the two overarching ones being instrumental interdisciplinarity, through my use of comics as a medium and as a pragmatic approach to problem solving, and critical interdisciplinarity, the goal of my research being to illuminate a society-driven problem, physical beauty, in a way that interrogates dominant ideas about it. The research methodology that I utilized was interpretivism, which is something that comes out of social science research. It involves researchers having to literally interpret elements of their study, and it assumes that you cannot separate the researcher from the research topic, and that ways of knowing the topic are assumed to be highly subjective and relative to the person. The primary relevant disciplines that I utilized throughout my comic were the following: evolutionary biology and psychology, in order to provide an instinctive and adaptive explanation for why women care about beauty so much; gender and women's studies and sociology, in order to investigate social and economic motivations for caring about beauty; and finally, art history, in order to provide interesting examples of beauty as shown in popular culture and media throughout the years. The specific scholarship of interdisciplinarity that I utilized in order to connect my disciplines were the following. One being building complex multi-causal explanations. And this was done through the development of my graphic novel narrative as a whole, which relies upon the answering of my research question through a variety of cohesive disciplinary perspectives. Two was checks and balances. It's a system of keeping everything intellectually honest. I literally had my two characters talk to each other about the disciplines that were involved, pointing out flaws with one that were also answered by others. And third, theory expansion, through the conclusions that I drew, because a lot of the researchers would say, hey, my subject is the only one that's right. Obviously, this is all about baby making, but then somebody else is like, you're wrong. It's not about baby making. A lot of this has to do with social and economic benefits that we see today, which we'll talk about in a second. So these were my conclusions. Beauty is neither shallow nor frivolous. Beauty is, and likely always will be, important for women for the following reasons. There are instinctive and adaptive benefits. Clearly, beauty standards and the things that we find beautiful in people are not arbitrary, and they've been shaped by evolution and a variety of benefits that have occurred throughout time for the human species. And so physical beauty is actually not just important to women, but to the whole species in general. There are social benefits as well. Frankly, every single study that I've looked at in gender and women's studies and sociology pointed to the fact that physical beauty aided in allowing women to develop meaningful connections with others in a readily available fashion. It also allowed them to communicate their social, cultural, and sexual identities in a very easy way. This leads directly into economic benefits. So women were generally able to get hired for jobs, get higher paying jobs, and also be able to network effectively with others in different companies and different settings through their attractiveness. Another thing that I discovered was that the stigma that beauty has, the idea that a lot of women feel a little guilty about investing in beauty, or the idea that I'll never really be able to be beautiful, comes from the fact that there's been a dominant beauty standard that's been established in the US since practically the beginning of its inception, which was caused by the first wave of immigrants, Northern and Western European men. But the future is bright and diverse. So for the most part, beauty is defined by an interaction of genes and environments. It's highly subjective, and it thrives on diversity. And the fact is that by 2050, a renowned demographer, William Fry, actually predicted that there won't be a dominant race. It'll be a very mixed melting pot, really, of people in the US. So a general critique of my project as a whole is that in my comic I would incorporate a little less text and some more images. I feel like I tried to cram a lot of information into my comic, and so in some parts it may seem a little congested with text. Additionally, I would think of perhaps getting IRB approval in order to conduct personal interviews. I think that might have been able to strike a more emotional accord with my female audience. Additionally, more research into the role of beauty in other groups such as transgender women and asexual women. And finally, just making my comic longer so that I could cover more intellectual ground. Questions?
All right, questions from the floor?
Yes?
Could you go back to the slide with the two books that you used for beauty?
Yeah.
So I see that those are written before the 21st century. Has the standard of beauty changed or evolved or adapted in some way since then?
So what's remarkable about a lot of the predictions made within these books is that they're remarkably accurate. Things have gotten more diverse, although the research that they cited didn't necessarily reflect that. There were a lot of studies that were focused primarily on white women and white heterosexual women at that. And in my own research, I sought to diversify my focus and make sure that a lot more groups were covered, although regrettably I couldn't talk about everyone. Any other questions?
I can't wait to read the comic, by the way.
Yes.
I've been hearing about it for a long time. But it comes back to sort of the politics of representation, right? So you're representing yourself and your alter ego as yourself as a particular body in this particular moment. That's race, sex, etc.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to the struggles that you had using yourself as a subject, but also trying to speak to this sort of universal problem.
So I don't think that my character necessarily interfered with the storytelling for the most part. I made sure to objectively talk about a lot of different topics and a lot of different groups of people. Although one section I do point out where I discuss Asian American women and their struggles, I say, oh, I actually went through a lot of these myself. And so for me, I think that what's really personal is that even if I have overcome certain issues with my physical appearance, such as body weight and basically primarily body weight, there are other issues that I've been suffering from as a result of my Asian American identity, something that I managed to talk about in the comic. For example, my grandparents will even tell me when I visit now, they'll be like, you look great, but you could use double eyelid surgery to make your eyes a little bigger, all that stuff, and it's like, ooh, okay, well, it's a nice suggestion, thank you, but I won't be taking it. Not that there's anything bad about plastic surgery. Dr. Friedman.
If I have.
Director Trump's.
Yeah, thank you. Just following up on a great question from the back there. To some extent, it sounds like really your focus through the disciplines was the way that each of those disciplines flowed through these two works, right?
Mhm.
Psychology on the right and evolutionary biology on the left, is that right?
Well, I think that evolutionary biology and psychology helped establish that the beauty standards that we have and physical features that we have are not arbitrary and that they come from somewhere. And then ultimately I use the other disciplines that I talked about, gender and women's studies, sociology, all those, in order to kind of contextualize everything into present day. So a lot of my newer research actually came out of sociology and gender and women's studies. A lot of the evolutionary biology and psychology studies, for the most part, have stayed about the same. Although there are newer works, a lot of the conclusions are about the same.
No, thank you.
So, I'm flipping through the Understanding Comics, and what jumped out to me the most was how white and how